Please pay close attention to where some of these reports are coming from because we're going to be covering a wide region. And reach out if you need help connecting with your local extension specialist wherever you are. We will get you hooked up and find you the right expert in your area. Look for links to resources from extension educators in your region in the show notes, and find photos of some of the things I'm discussing on our Instagram page at Serious Grower. Each of these field reports will start out with the most time-sensitive reports from what folks are seeing out on commercial farms. I will then dive into historical reports to summarize some of the most common issues folks were talking about this time last year, the year before that. I will also take care to specify when I am talking about tunnel-grown crops because they are very different, but otherwise assume I am talking about open culture. All right, top line reports for April 22nd, 2026. It sounds like leek moth is flying in northern regions where there are active monitoring programs that trap the adult moths to indicate risk of infestation. So please refer to your local extension resources for more information about regional activity and recommendations for management. I am unfamiliar with this pest myself, but it's my understanding that this caterpillar is relatively easy to manage if you know it's coming, particularly in bulbing onion. It is likely more challenging for fall crops, overwintered onion crops, and for leeks, because leeks are out there and susceptible during all three flights during the year. We are starting to hear early reports of Allium Leafminer oviposition scars in onion crops and their cousins in Pennsylvania, New York, and Massachusetts. This is that new onion pest that is a fly. So it lays its eggs on onions, and those oviposition scars mean that a fly probably laid its eggs on that onion leaf already. And it sounds like Allium Leafminer might be creeping north. So folks in the Hudson River Valley and Western Mass should have their eyes peeled. Pay attention to local extension resources for confirmation of new occurrences. It sounds like the severity of Allium Leafminer, like its pest status, is still a little unclear, and it may or may not be an issue for you if you do find it on your farm. I want to hear more from you about that. It sounds like the absolute worst case scenarios are in leeks again, as there have been reports of Allium Leafminer pupae. So these are like little tiny brown hard pupae being found inside harvested leeks that look perfectly good and marketable on the outside. So harvested, taken home, opened up, and shock horror, what are these little brown things? So that's worst case scenario, but I want to hear more from folks about how serious their Allium Leafminer pest status is. Just looking at prediction models for cabbage maggot, it looks like the mid-Atlantic states are in the tail end of peak flight, and it looks like areas of Connecticut and New York are entering peak flight periods. Find the link in the show notes for this prediction model on NEWA. That's newa.cornell.edu. That combines weather data to predict when they are active. NEWA also has a prediction model for Cercospora leaf spot on beets that will use prediction models to tell you how high your risk of infection is for beets. That's interesting to you. Go and check it out. A few comments about distinguishing between cabbage maggot infestations and regular old damping off, because you might see these two things impacting very young emerging seedlings and want to know the difference. Damping off is a fungal disease, so symptoms are rapid mushy decay right at the soil line, often associated with white fuzzy mold. Maggots are larvae causing mechanical damage, so you'll see chewing, hollowing out, tunnels, both in roots and stems and seeds. So damping off is caused by soil-borne fungi, water molds, Pythium, Rhizoctonia, Fusarium that thrive in wet, cool conditions, wet, cool soils. So drainage might be part of that story. Maggot damage, on the other hand, follows egg laying from adult flies flying around now or soon, and you will confirm that by finding small white larvae in the soil or in the plants. So, little rule of thumb. All right, looking back at historical reports. So these are things that people are typically talking about around this time of year in previous years. Most issues are troubleshooting problems with transplants that are failing to thrive. So folks are trying to figure out how changing potting media, compost, irrigation water, fertilizer regimes are affecting their success. These are the usual suspects. But sometimes we identify region-wide issues like virus-infected stock or particular potting mix with pH or salt issues, so be able to identify those. If you ever feel any heat coming from compost-based mixes, this might be a sign that there is still some microbial activity that needs to, get itself done with. That compost still needs to mature. So if you feel heat, make sure to mix that compost thoroughly, give it a minute, maybe a week or two before you use it. Some other things that are commonly happening around this time of year, many sweet corn pest monitoring programs are just starting to put their traps out for corn earworm, fall armyworm, and European corn borer in late April and early May, so stay tuned for more information there. We do hear reports of crucifer flea beetle in brassica crops. These adults are often emerging from their overwintering sites, feeding on young brassicas, causing their characteristic shot hole feeding damage on leaves. Several diseases that were reported through diagnostic labs as early as April in previous years include things like black rot in brassicas caused by Xanthomonas, that's a seed-borne pathogen, arugula bacterial disease caused by Pseudomonas. Symptoms of these diseases can be really similar to other things. Confirmation from a diagnostician is important. So if you have some suspect things, make sure to get some samples into your labs. For this week's deep dive, I don't have a fact sheet for you, but this is more of a request for information. I really want to hear from you if you have an issue with ants. And I'm talking about ants negatively impacting transplants this time of year. It's something we hear about every once in a blue moon and suspect there are several different stories going on, different scenarios, different symptoms, different species, and there isn't a lot of solid information about what's happening, but please reach out because I want to know more and I want to know if we can find some patterns. Here's what we do know. Folks report ants causing damage to transplants, including brassicas, fennel, carrots. It's a broad spectrum approach. It's not one plant family over another. And that damage looks like girdling right at the soil surface. And then once folks are inspecting a little bit further, they will find ants nesting in the roots of these transplants. So that girdling will look like kind of very thinning of that stem right at the soil surface. We've heard reports of this both in transplant trays as well as in the ground right after transplanting. It's almost always inside tunnels or associated with greenhouses, but not necessarily. And it is most commonly reported during turning of the season, so early in the spring or late in the fall. Who does this, right? We don't know exactly. We haven't gotten a really good confirmation on identity of these ants because there's many species of ants. They're a very diverse group. We do know from the literature that fire ants are known to girdle plants. I don't think we have many reports of fire ants in the Northeast, and we certainly would be able to identify that species pretty easily based on its very aggressive behavior. Wild blueberry growers are known to be affected by Allegheny mound ant taking over patches of wild blueberry plants. They'll actually inject formic acid into plant stems, but they're not necessarily associated with structures, or we don't really know if we would expect to find them in greenhouses, in high tunnels. The winter ant, on the other hand, it's a native ant to the U.S. and we'll find it in the Northeast. There's no reports in the literature as to whether it's known to girdle plants, but it would be a species you'd expect to find associated with high tunnels and greenhouses and active very early in the spring. Another species, pavement ant. There's actually several species are kind of within that complex of pavement ants. They are reported to girdle plants, and they would be associated with structures. It's known to nest between cracks of concrete, asphalt, rocks, under stones. That's how it gets its name, pavement ant. One of the ant specialists we talked to said he has actually seen pavement ant doing this to vegetable transplants in his own garden, so that's a possibility. When it comes to management, we know even less. There is certainly a possibility to keep ants off of transplant trays up on a bench by creating a sticky barrier on the legs of that bench. This approach has not been tested, but it seems right. Using ant baits is a possibility, as most ant species will take a sugar boric acid bait. However, some species are more motivated by fats and protein, so that might be an issue. We're not really sure. There are several ant baits you can acquire and deploy in retrievable dispensers, but there is a little bit of regulatory gray area here because those products are registered for use inside houses, right? So you can use them in your home to get rid of nuisance ants in your home. And a high tunnel is a structure, so those ant baits in dispensers seem like less of a gray area because you can take the dispensers and get rid of them. On the other hand, granular scatter baits might be a little bit darker gray area there because you're deploying them where you're growing a crop. However, there is a boric acid bait called Mother Earth scatter bait that is armory listed for use, but it's listed for use in structures and not for use in food crops. There are also armory listed scatter baits like Seduce, which contain spinosad and are registered for use in crops and may have some activity for ants, but this is also untested and may not be worth the expense. It really depends on how serious of a problem you might have. Well, photos have been shared with ant specialists whenever these oddball situations come up. It's pretty hard to get a species confirmation from photographs. So getting some actual specimens would be very helpful. If you're seeing this, please reach out. I would like to get some ants from you. That is it for today, but let me know what you want to know more about, and thank you so much for listening.